quick little thank you and stuff like that at the beginning here. Thanks to App Speaks, first of all, for putting this on. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of part on these students' behalf this semester, putting this all together, this year really, to put it all together. Thank you to the Appalachian State Comm Department, Communication Department, there for letting us just have App Speaks, period, and do our thing. We really appreciate them and everybody over there. Last but not least, if you wanted to check the back of your program, there is a QR code that you can sign to apply for, or scan to sign up for next year's Panorama. So that's all good to go if you like what you see here. And please feel free to stay after the show because there will be a food catered reception. And then let's just get into some drag with Raven and Who Are You? A Question of Identity.
Hello, that was a lot. That was kind of dramatic, am I right? All right, so how is everyone doing today? Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, I think we all try to feel pretty good about ourselves usually, am I right? Yeah, so I was thinking about that the other day when I was shopping for a new outfit. I was about to have all these grad school interviews as I'm a fourth year here at App State, and I was like, I want to feel really good about myself. So how did I do that? Well, I decided to go and get a nice blazer, the one I'm wearing right now, a nice pair of pants, and I just wanted to look the part of a grad student. And I feel like I did. I felt really good about myself at that point of time. And I don't think I'm unique in this situation. I think we all try to find ways to feel good about ourselves. Whether we choose new parts of ourselves to show off through clothing, or we decide to maybe wear that blazer, we all pick and choose different bits and pieces of ourselves to show off every day. And how do we do that besides clothing? Well, we might wear a hat. I see that person back there, they have an App State hat on. Do you go to App State? Yeah, okay, well then that just shows us one thing about that person sitting back there. So we might decide to change our hair. I had hair that went about halfway down my back until I randomly decided to shave my head one day. That was a big major change in my identity. Or we might decide to wear makeup. I personally don't, but I know a lot of people do, and they do that to make themselves either feel good about themselves or just to present themselves as being more confident. Now, what is this spectrum of identity expression? The person wearing the hat in the back of the room, that's a little bit more simple. That's a little bit more basic, you could say. So you see that one part of themselves. Okay, they might be an App State student. They might support App State. Maybe their parents went there. A lot of questions can arise from this. But then there's also those more extreme versions of identity expression. And perhaps one of the most extreme would be a drag queen. They go through a lot to make themselves appear to be women. So that means cinching their waists, wearing wigs, gluing down their lace fronts, putting on layers upon layers of makeup, gluing down their eyebrows, the whole 9 yards, just so they can fulfill their role as a woman. And it's all of that hard work and effort that they put into themselves that leads to this creation of a different persona. So we have some folks that you consider to be drag queens that are actually just everyday pop culture icons. So Dolly Parton, she even said herself, "It's a good thing I was born a girl, otherwise I'd be a drag queen." So why is Dolly Parton considered to be a drag queen? One, her hair is not real. I don't think it ever has been. Number two, she has a ridiculous amount of plastic surgery. Number three, she wears a lot of makeup. And number four, drag queens love her. Drag queens have really latched themselves onto Dolly Parton because she is the epitome of what drag is. She makes herself to appear to be as feminine as possible, and that's for her self-benefit. She doesn't care what anybody else thinks about her. So, who are some other people that we can think of? Mrs. Doubtfire. While Robin Williams was kind of just thrown into this role, he ended up loving being Mrs. Doubtfire, like so much that he was just full-on embraced in this character of an old woman that he even said himself he enjoyed being that. He enjoyed fulfilling that role. So what does this mean for us? We go to RuPaul Charles, who was perhaps, have you guys heard of RuPaul? One of the most famous drag queens, been around since the 80s, and she said even herself that we're all born naked and the rest is drag. Well, the first part of that sentence is kind of easy to understand. Obviously, we're all born naked. I mean, that's how we come into the world. So what is the rest? What is the rest that makes us all be in drag all the time? So that's how drag provides us with an example to explore identity and play with it. And even RuPaul brought that into question. What is the rest? How are we all being or performing drag? So this is a quick aside, and these are just some lessons on pronouns, because I will be talking a lot of confusing terms, she versus he, as they are typically men who put on wigs to perform as women. So with pronouns, almost always when they are drag queens are in drag, you will just use she. So I'll be using she for most of my presentation. Out of drag, just ask. There are some drag queens that don't care. RuPaul really doesn't care. She has said herself, you can call me he, you can call me she, as long as you call me. So with RuPaul, it's he or she. But as it is customary in this environment to ask people what their pronouns are, the same goes for drag queens. So other terminology. Gender, we all know, or most of us will know what gender is as we talk a lot about it in this college setting. So these are traits that kind of lie on either masculine or feminine sides. And then there's that binary, and when we are expected to either be masculine or feminine. And drag queens kind of just go and break this binary apart and almost are kind of in protest the idea of having this gender binary. And now we move on to who is RuPaul? Who is this person that's just a drag queen but is much more than that? So she's known as the mother of drag queens. And the main reason is that she's brought a lot of drag queens into the public platform. When she was young, she was in the face of a lot of punk drag bands in that alternative scene, did a lot of work in New York City, eventually made it big enough to have her own albums, to be in music videos, and then TV shows. So that's kind of how RuPaul transcended through drag culture and nightclubs into the mainstream pop culture. And what else does RuPaul give us? Well, RuPaul gives us RuPaul's Drag Race. This is one of the shows that is definitely credited with bringing drag queens into actual pop culture and mainstream culture, because it gives that platform for drag queens to come and perform and compete in order to see who's going to be that next drag superstar of the world. And this is another aside. RuPaul's not perfect. There are several controversies surrounding her and her views on the trans community, but those are not valid because drag queens are and can be trans, and they do have a place in the community. So the main thing here that we're going to do is just look at identity via RuPaul's Drag Race. And what can we really gain from them? And what is that rest, the rest? What did RuPaul mean when he say that? So I kind of did a study, an analysis of one season of the show, and I was looking for different messages that kind of proved who drag queens are, how do they create this identity, and how do they create another persona. So we have vernacular. What do they say? How do they talk? What type of speech do they use? Their nonverbals, their facial expressions, the emotions that they put into their performances. And then we also have rituals and practices, and this is really important to drag queens. So first, we have vernacular. What's really interesting about drag queen vernacular, has anyone ever seen the show in the room? I'm sure. Awesome. Well, looky there. So on the show, a lot of the drag queens will adapt feminine language, refer to each other as mama, sister. A lot of times they will use the she pronoun a lot. So there's a heavy amount of feminine language. Perhaps the most interesting thing is the use of the word bitch. Inherently, that's like how women, they are taking that term back because it was an insult thrown at us. But drag queens use bitch all the time. So I started to think, well, is that because they are fulfilling that feminine role to the point where they feel like they can also use bitch? Which is something interesting. So they really do appropriate this feminine language. So they're nonverbals. One really important section of nonverbal would be the emotions that they put into the lip sync, which is how drag queens perform. If they are not putting full emotion in, or they are not giving their all in their performance, then most of the time the lip sync won't be as enjoyable. But there's also little random vocalizations that drag queens love to make. And for some reason, this is what really resonates with popular culture. Do you guys know that sound that Cardi B makes? I'm not gonna try and make it. That's a drag queen thing. Cardi B makes that insane vocalization, and it comes directly from drag queen culture. Years before she became popular, drag queens were using that vocalization. And now stars like Kim K use it, other celebrities that are in the same realm as Cardi B. The tongue pop was one pioneered by Alyssa Edwards. And even pop culture people use this now too. It's just a vocalization they love to use, and it was straight from a drag queen. So the rituals and practices. We have, like I mentioned, lip syncing, the act of just moving your mouth to the song. But then we also have reading. So reading is like directly insulting someone, but you don't really mean it. You're trying to be funny with them. We do this a lot in our lives, whether we're being sarcastic or just joking around with friends. So one of my favorite reads of all time is from Bianca Del Rio. And she tells this other drag queen on the other side, Adore, she says, Adore, I know what you got on your SATs. Ketchup. She does look kind of dumb, am I right? Like, she's exuding that personality. She's a rocker chick. She performs and makes her own music. She just loves to be almost like that dumb valley girl persona that I'm sure some of you guys know what I'm talking about. So what do all of these things mean, and how do they tie together, and what do they actually build into? So with all three of those, we get the identity and the image of a drag queen. Who are they as individuals, and how are they different, or how might individual traits be different? So these are all drag queens from different seasons of RuPaul's Drag Race, and all of them are unique in their own ways. So the first one on the left, she's actually, that's Trixie Mattel. She's a folk star, makes her own folk albums, released vinyls, and she is the only drag queen to ever do that. She's very unique in that fact. And then on the other end, we have Bob the drag queen, who doesn't do music, but she'll rap. She has her own podcast. She's extremely funny, does a lot of stand-up comedy, and that is unique to her. And then we have everything in between, from makeup artists to rappers to cosplayers, and just this whole unique and beautiful collage of drag queen identities. And they all have that unique persona. That's an important word here. So I'm gonna take some time to be a little selfish, because this is my favorite drag queen, and so this is Katya. And Katya is really interesting for several reasons. So what can we learn from her? First, Katya is not Russian at all. She just knows the language and pretends she's a Russian hooker. So that's one thing about Katya that's really interesting. Another thing about Katya is that out of drag, she struggles with addiction to both alcoholic and drug substances. So this definitely affects her in multiple ways. We have Katya on the runway. She looks confident, right? Yeah, I would say she looks pretty good. When she was on this runway, she said that she looked like a lesbian literary agent. Particularly, my favorite thing about it is that she has on those god-awful, like, neon green shoes, but it's just so right with everything else. Like, she looks amazing. And she appears to be confident, like she really believes in who she is. But then we also have Katya in the workroom. This is the same episode. She's obviously not feeling too confident about herself. There's like some level of anxiety there because she's questioning her abilities and to actually perform and do well in the challenge. In that episode, someone had just come up to her and basically said, your idea is crap, you need to start over. And she didn't know what she was gonna do. So she had to, one, rethink if she was gonna have to change the whole entire challenge, or two, just stick with her idea and succeed. And she did the second option, and she actually won that challenge and succeeded that week. So we see two different sides of Katya, from the workroom and from the runway aspect. We see someone who's vulnerable and really in tune with their emotions because of their past struggles and past instances where they doubted themselves. But we also see someone who's really confident and believes in themselves and their ability to present and fulfill the role as a woman. Now, this doesn't mean I can control, copy, and paste this equation into my life and expect it to mean something. For Katya, the reason why people love her and the reason why people find her to be so relatable is that she shows her vulnerability and she shows her confidence. Now, this equation may not be the same for me. And it's also true that she isn't a pioneer of some new idea either. People have been doing this for a long time, being in different situations and deciding when to show certain parts of themselves, whether it be through clothing or hair or makeup, like we talked about in the beginning. The thing is, with drag queens, they bring in those interesting layers of playing with masculinity, playing with femininity, and just sprinkling different layers of gender throughout. And so we get to see a really interesting and stark difference of identity. So, what does this mean? It means that we have to think about how Drag Race has moved past all of the previous years and how for a long time it wasn't even popular, but now it's saturated into mainstream culture. And Katya is a prime example of this. She's utilized multiple platforms to get herself out there, such as YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter, where it's really easy to fall into a hole and just stumble across a drag queen's YouTube page. There are fans of the show now that are stereotypical white, straight females, and that's almost the complete opposite audience you would expect of Drag Race. But people are falling in love with the show thanks to these platforms that have allowed them to really show who they are. And it is on these platforms where people and drag queens like Katya have shows and they talk about basic everyday topics, like we do in conversations. So one episode that I really like is when they talk about hygiene. Isn't that like something we all deal with? We all like have to decide when we take a shower. I mean, I do. So we see how they use their vernacular in drag on YouTube. We get to see how they use their nonverbals through social media. We get to see their rituals and practices play out live before our very eyes. And it's almost as if they are unique. They are that individual, but it's through these choices that we really get that sense of identity in who they are. I like to think one group of people that could really resonate with this is college students. We were just talking about this before Panorama started. So I am not the same person I was 4 years ago today. I'm about to graduate, and I wish I could go back in time and like slap some sense into myself, because I am not the same person. I'm sure that's true for everyone. Are we the same people? We change day to day. We make different choices every day. We decide who to be every single day. And I think that's what the rest is, those decisions that we make, those choices that we are faced with every single day, whether they be through vernacular, rituals and practices, or the nonverbals that we show off. There's just a choice in front of us. And one of those choices can be, I'm gonna put on a hat today that has a picture of my dog on it because I love her. And that shows that I love my dog. And the main message here is that whether you realize it or not, we are all doing this every day, and drag is everywhere around us. Thank you.
Wow, wasn't that awesome? Y'all should scan the QR code on the back of the program so that you can apply for next year's, and you can do the same thing. All right. So let's see here. Next up is going to be Kelsey. And please don't go breaking my heart and leave early and miss her speech, because it is on the fundamentals of healing a heart. So it's very important, and it's something that we all need to be thinking about.
Hi everybody, well welcome. So my talk is on the fundamentals of healing a heart. So ever since I was a kid, I always had a really strong desire to want to help and inspire people, but I didn't really know what that would mean for my life until I was diagnosed with Lyme disease. So let's talk about what Lyme is. A lot of people know it as the tick disease because it's most commonly transmitted by ticks, but you can also get it from spiders, fleas, mosquitoes, all those fun little critters. So it is a special kind of bacterial infection. No, you don't feel so special when you have it. Bacteria itself is pretty special. It is called a spirochete, and it is shaped like a corkscrew. So when you get bitten and it is transmitted, it can quite literally very quickly screw its way out of your bloodstream and into all parts of your body and different tissues. It is extremely difficult to diagnose because there is one conventional blood test for it called the Western blot. And if you don't get tested within 30 days of being bitten, then the bacteria is no longer in your bloodstream. So this test currently has a 56% false negativity rate. So let that sink in for a second. Over 56% of people who have Lyme disease and have all these random symptoms for years walk away from the doctors being told that they're fine and it's not Lyme. And it can go years and years and years without a diagnosis. And if you're one of the lucky ones to catch it with a diagnosis, then you start the treatment process. So treatment is compared to chemotherapy. It is a similar cycle. You go for about 18 to 24 months, and you build the body up, you tear it down, and then you rebuild. It comes in cycles, usually from about 30 to 90 days. So you'll go 1 to 3 months on, give your body a break for a few weeks, and then you cycle again, and you keep doing that until hopefully you can get it into remission. But it is an incurable disease, so that is always a possibility that treatment might be a constant for the rest of your life. Unfortunately, treatment causes a lot of symptoms to be heightened and can even cause a lot of new ones to arise. So some of the most common ones are digestive pains, things like nausea and vomiting, or just like, bloating and cramping. Things like neurological symptoms, word finding and sentence forming, memory loss, emotional reactivity, even things like tremors and seizures. And then some other ones, some of the more really fun ones, you have to be really careful when you're in the sun when you're on treatment, because just the way with the UV rays react with the prescriptions, you can actually get a chemical burn if you're not careful. So I know so much about this because I actually have Lyme, and I have had Lyme for about 9 years now, but I went undiagnosed for 8 of those 9 years. So this picture of me ice skating was actually about 10 years ago, just about a year or so before my diagnosis. I was always extremely healthy, just very active, loved my sports, and the way my family likes to describe it is like a light switch. I lived life with the light switch on, just full of life, full of energy. And one day I went to bed, and I woke up the next morning, and the light switch had just turned off. And inherently, I was the same person, but my body was different. I had to eventually stop, doing my sports. My body couldn't handle it much anymore. It started developing food allergies, starting to lose weight. This picture of me outside is actually at my lowest weight of 70 pounds when I was 15. It happened so quickly, and between the time span of it all, I've seen somewhere between 30 to 40 doctors, and it was a long process of just being referred to someone else and being told, well, it's just growing pains, and you'll grow up and you'll be fine. Well, then I grew up and I wasn't fine. So luckily last summer, we pushed for a really good and accurate Lyme test, and it came back screaming positive, which had so many emotions all on its own, initial one being relief for a final diagnosis, but then I had to start treatment, and that has been a whole feat on its own. A lot of people will ask me, what's it like to live with Lyme disease? And you can list off symptoms, and people are like, well, that's cool, but what's it actually like to live a day with Lyme disease? And something I always turn to is the spoon theory. So let's say each and every one of you, I'm going to give you 10 spoons. So use these wisely. These spoons represent you and your day, how much you can give of yourself. So let's run through a typical day. You would typically, get up and maybe eat breakfast. We're gonna pause here, and I'm gonna go ahead and snatch 2 of those spoons from you. And you might be thinking, oh my gosh, how did I lose 2 spoons? My day just started. So let me explain. Someone with chronic illness, getting up in the morning can be a really big task. Having to tell your brain to put your muscles into action, to get yourself presentable and ready for the day, that can be a big task. So you might think, okay, well, that one I understand, but I just ate breakfast. Shouldn't I gain a spoon? Doesn't food give you energy? It can, but again, for someone with chronic illness, you did more than just eat breakfast. You had to think about what you were going to make. You had to make it, you had to eat it, and then if you had enough energy, you had to clean it up. And you have to do that for all your meals throughout the day, your beverages, your snacks. So the spoon theory is really just to show that someone with chronic illness can't go through life being mindless. They always have to be aware of their body and how much they can give of themselves and how much they can handle in a day. Because some days you might have 10 spoons, other days you might have 5, some days you might have 30. It always just depends on the day. So a lot of people, especially with Lyme, but really any chronic illness, maybe it's not even Lyme or an autoimmune disease. Maybe you have depression or anxiety, or just you're struggling with a family or a relationship problem. Sometimes when you wake up in the morning, you can go through life and think, I feel incurable and I don't see that light at the end of the tunnel. And maybe if you do have a chronic illness and you just get a diagnosis, then you have those emotions of strength and relief. But a lot of times it all eventually turns into a sense of just frustration and defeat. And I've had a lot of friends and a lot of really close people come to me, especially with chronic illness, and say, Kelsey, I'm trying so hard to heal my body. I've been at this for years. I'm following what the doctor says, and I haven't seen any progress. Why am I not healing? And I always want to just pause there, because it's so important to recognize healing is not just a physical process. Healing really does go into how are you healing your heart? How are you healing mentally, emotionally, spiritually? Because all of those aspects of healing can be just as, if not even more important than physical healing. And to show this, I made a healing model that encompasses the concepts of faith, hope, and love. And I know that probably sounds like the perfect, cookie cutter answer. You see them hanging on the walls, on someone's bumper as they're driving down the street. But there's something so beautiful about those 3 words and the concepts behind them that people don't really take a second to digest. So let's just delve into those. So the first one is faith. Faith is the constant in our life. You can wake up every morning and not know what you're walking into, but faith is that one thing that recenters you. It's the one thing that doesn't change. And for me, that's always been my religion. I walk into a day, and if it feels crazy, I might pause, I might say a prayer, I might give my worries to God, and I instantly feel better. But for a lot of people, it doesn't have to be a religion. Maybe it's a spouse or significant other, maybe it's a song or an art or a dance, but it's important to figure out where your faith lies. The next one is hope. Hope is what gives us confidence. It gives us that courage to know that we can make it, that the light at the end of the tunnel is there, even if it's dim at that time in our life. So one thing, as far as examples go, I have walked into so many doctor's appointments, shutting the doctors down before they have even started talking. They'll sit there and come up with these grand plans, and I'll sit there and act like I'm engaged, but on the inside, I'm really thinking, I've been here before, I know it's gonna happen, it's not gonna help. And luckily, my doctors are smart, and they usually can sense that pretty quickly, and they'll say, Kelsey, no, don't give up hope yet. We haven't tried this combination, let's just see where it goes, because it can't hurt anything at this point. But for a lot of people who don't have chronic illness, let's use an example of a really tough class. Maybe you're heading into a really bad semester, and you think, there's no way I'm going to pass this class. But maybe you start the semester strong. You talk to your teacher, you work really, really hard, and you get an A on your first exam. That gives you so much confidence in yourself and so much courage to know that you can continue and that you will even accomplish your goal of getting that A in that really tough class. So it's all about finding where your hope is. Next one is love. Love is our support. It cultivates that joy in our life. And for me, it's always been my family and my friends primarily. There have been, especially this last year with treatment, so many nights in the heat of treatment where I will sit all night on my bathroom floor just praying to keep some part of my dinner in. And I might wake up in the same spot the next morning and think, I have never felt more small. And this disease has made me feel so defeated. And then I get a call from my family saying, we love you, and we're here for you, and we're going to call your doctors and figure this out. And then I have a friend maybe bring me soup, and a roommate take me to the doctor. And they show me how much that they care for me and how much that I'm not alone. And maybe that's easy to understand for some, but maybe others feel like they don't have that support system. So it's important to emphasize that this aspect of love is a give and take kind of concept. So maybe you feel like you don't have anyone that can give that to you. Find someone who you can give that to. Because if you know someone, and maybe they're doing so well with their faith and with their hope, but they feel lonely, then be that source of love for them, be that source of validation, and then you will almost always get it back from that person as well, because it really is a give and a take process. So just pulling it all together, it's important to know that your heart can't really fully heal if you just have one aspect of this model. Like I said, going back to the love example, when my family calls me when I'm sick, they remind me that I've been here before, I've overcome this stage, and I will continue to move forward. Well, not only are they showing me that they're there for me, but they're showing me that I have hope, I have courage because I've been here before and I've risen above this. And then I might have a friend say, hey, let's go to church today, or let's get together and just simply say a prayer. And that helps recenter me. So healing your heart is a very cyclical process, and you truly cannot heal your heart if you don't have all three concepts. So I hope that you're able to take those concepts today and apply them to your life, and that when you do, you'll experience as much healing in your heart as I have with mine. Thank you.
Didn't that really touch your heart? Because I know it touched mine. Let me just remind you one more time about the QR code that's on the back of the programs. Please scan it and sign up for Panorama next year. That application's already set up for you. Awesome. Also, fun fact, we will have cheesecake bites at the food reception after this speech. So if that's also something you're interested in, you'll want to sit down and hang around for it. Who likes puns? Anyone? Anyone? We got a couple of hands, and they're not dads, so that's a good sign, right? Fair, very fair. I personally love puns. So if you're ready for it, I can throw one at you real quick, if you're feeling it. All right. So what do we call a cow with 2 legs? Lean beef. Thank you. What do we call a cow with no legs? There it is. Thank you. What do we call a man with no arms, no legs, floating in the ocean? There it is. How about a man with no arms and no legs who's about to come up here right now to help us find the truth that's out there? Here's Logan Frazier. Good one. You already knew it.
So I'm actually going to try and tell you that there is no truth to be found out there, so sorry for that false promise. So today I'm going to be talking about this concept that I've been working on over this past semester that's really based on these interests of mine I've developed over the last 4 years of my college experience, which I'm calling legible truth. So I'm going to argue for this concept of legible truth broken up into these 3 separate parts. The first is based on this idea that if we create images that we prefer over the original, so if we're creating an image of something and we begin to prefer that image more than that original, which this is called the simulacrum. And language follows this same pattern, that language is in some way creating images of things, and I'm going to argue language creates images of everything in the world. And if it follows this same pattern, which this concept is called narrative theory, then we are removed from the world in some fundamental way. So I'll go through that again. There's this concept of the simulacrum, that we create these images that we begin to prefer over the original, and that language operates in this way. And if language operates in this way and is our primary way of interacting with the world, then we are fundamentally in some way removed from the world. And this is called pessimism or philosophical pessimism. So I'm going to go through this quote to begin trying to get us to think about this concept. It's from this book called Children of the Mind, the fourth book in the Ender Quartet series by Orson Scott Card, which I've got to explain this quick concept called speaking for the dead to make this quote make sense. Ender is the main character of these books. He was a war hero turned villain because he essentially killed an entire alien species. And then he spent his life trying to understand afterwards this alien species and somehow communicate that to the world. So his purpose changed from destruction to some sort of communication of this species to make them understandable. And this is what the concept of speaking for the dead is in this sci-fi series. It's this idea that anybody's personhood can be explained in some way. Any controversial figure, if you get to the bottom of who they are, then they are somehow communicable and somehow become sympathetic because you can understand them. So this is the quote, and I'm going to read through it, so bear with me. "That's Ender's life," said Plicht, "unpeeling the onion of truth. Only unlike most of us, he knew that there was no golden kernel inside. There were only the layers of illusion and misunderstanding. What mattered was to know all the errors, all the self-serving explanations, and then not to find, but to make a kernel of truth. That was Ender's gift to us, to free us from the illusion that any one explanation will ever contain the final answer for all time, for all hearers. There's always, always more to learn." And that's the main thing I want to talk about today, this last paragraph. That was Ender's gift to us, to free us from the illusion that any one explanation will ever contain the final answer for all time, for all hearers. There is always, always more to learn. I want to unpack what that means. So quickly, I'm going to try and explain this concept of the simulacrum. This is a concept that Baudrillard, a French philosopher and sociologist, invented essentially in the 1970s, and he explains it primarily through the successive phases of the image. So the successive phases of the image is this relationship between the original and an image of the original. And the first phase is reflection, in which the image is supposed to reflect something, tell some sort of truth about the original. The second is the mask. This is when the image is supposed to in some way mask the original, tell some sort of lie about it. The third is simulation. This is when the image, the relationship between the original and the image becomes tenuous. This is when you know that there is a relationship between them, but you're beginning to forget the original. And the simulacrum is this final stage where it doesn't matter anymore that there was an original. The image will do on its own. So one of Baudrillard's favorite ways of explaining this concept was through the image of the Disney castle. So the Disney castle was actually based on this castle that was built by Ludwig II. And this castle was based on Richard Wagner's fairy tales, which was based on these concepts and these folklore made during the medieval period. So the Disney castle is this image in this long chain of different images based off of this original medieval period. So you end up getting something that has very little tie to reality. Castles did not look like that. They didn't operate in that way. Another way that I think makes somewhat even more sense is what we have today with Princess Leia and Carrie Fisher. So Carrie Fisher did not play the most recent Princess Leia, but it was a digitized image of her in Rogue One. So you had this actress pretending to be Leia, looking exactly like Carrie Fisher. This is an instance where the image is wholly untied from the original. Carrie Fisher isn't even involved in this performance anymore. Carrie Fisher doesn't matter. What matters is Leia. So this is the concept of the simulacrum. And I think this applies to language. I think this is what language does. So I would say, as I would reiterate what Burke says, which is that language is wholly realistic. When we are speaking, we're not just trying to describe the world, we're actually trying to incarnate the world. We are actually trying to bring the world into being. This is why he says the word is a realism of the act. The rhetorical creation of value is, by the nature of the form, irrational. This is a quote from Card that I think will help us understand this. Language might soften communication because it allows us to think we understand, since it has a universal or standardized bank of meaning of tools. So this is what language is doing. It's acting like when we say cat, we mean the same thing. When we really have totally different ideas of cat. When I say cat, I have these experiences of these devil beasts that come and attack me when I feel like there's no reason to. And when you say cat, you're talking about your lovely kitten, Fluffy or whatever. And we are not really communicating. We have totally different concepts with this word cat. So this is what language is doing. When we use language, we're building these worlds that are based on the real world but do not exist. But we act like those are the real world. And this is why I think pessimism has a pretty good argument. It's this concept that we are always mediated by symbology. There is always the thing, and then our interpretation or response to that thing, and then our reflection on that interpretation. And then we begin to take that interpretation as the thing itself. For example, when you and your friends go to some sort of event, even in class, and then you leave, you often have to discuss the event to actually understand what happened. Once you discuss the event, that's when you really get it. It wasn't being there for the event that gave you the thing itself. It was talking about it afterwards. That's when you build the image of the event that you begin to believe instead of the original experience. This is how we interact with the world. This is what the pessimist claims. Nietzsche says that this is the primitive world of metaphor, that we wear a mask with dignified, symmetrical features. Rather than actually interacting with the world, we build these worlds around us that separate us from the world. This is another quote from Card that has to do with this. Humans invent an imaginary lover and put that mask over the face of the body in their bed. That is the tragedy of language, my friend, that we are able to create these false images of things. So what do you do with that? Sounds pretty intense. I think it's ultimately quite liberating. And to explain that, I want to look at this quote once again, with an emphasis on that was Ender's gift to us, to free us from the illusion that any one explanation will ever contain the final answer for all time, for all hearers. There is always, always more to learn. What this means is that any time that there is some sort of understanding that you come to about the world, with others or on your own, what this means is that that understanding is always going to be some sort of image, that you can give it up if it doesn't work, that if it doesn't work, you can move on to something new. Your identity no longer has to be in this immediate understanding of the world. It can be in the process of gaining these understandings, rather than it being in this moment of, this is what I think the world is like, and if you say otherwise, that is going to feel like an attack on me as a person. Rather, that's an attack on that theory. That's a critique of that theory of the world. This, I think, understanding the world in this way allows you to recreate yourself consistently, to always be able to contradict yourself and move on, to create new images. This doesn't mean that every image is equally as founded. There is obviously some sort of relation to things that are happening. There are better reads and worse reads, better interpretations and worse interpretations. But the exciting thing is it doesn't matter in the way it might if you think that's it. This is the only option. The way it matters is what you choose to become a part of. Thank you.
Now, I am unsure how to top puns. I am not a master at punography, but I'll try. All right, that one, fine, whatever. I'm a little bit of a different kind of speaker. So this is a little interactive. You got to give something back to me. So within 6 months, 6 months ago, I have lost 170 pounds and recently gotten engaged. Thank you. She's over there. But yeah, those things are related very strongly. Nothing starts a good engagement like, will you please make me the happy? Oh God. Call the paramedics. Say yes, and then call 911. All right. So she said, I am a stand-up comedian. It's really hard for me not to try to talk into this clicker right now. So I'm going to be talking to you guys about comedy and politics, and we'll see how it goes. So I've been doing stand-up comedy for a long time. That is me at 12 years old talking to a karaoke machine in my living room to my mom and my cousin. Luckily, they laughed. Right? Talked about raisin cookies and frogs. Things I hate equally. And that was, you can see the inflation happen in real time. And then this is the final product, right? So it's true. So I've loved comedy basically my entire life. And one of the reasons I love comedy is that it can build bonds with people. Think about when you first came to college. When you didn't know anybody and things were brand new and terrifying, the first people you gravitated towards were people that made you laugh, right? People that can make you feel at home or comfortable in your new environment. People that can make you laugh, or people that had a car. Equally as useful. I really started to love comedy because of my dad, right? My dad was the best unpaid comedian I'd ever known. He had his own maintenance business. He would drive a white panel van and fix things for people. And we couldn't afford a babysitter, so he took me with him. And the only thing you let a 12-year-old do on a job site is hold the flashlight. Because if he gave me a blowtorch, he'd have to pay me. But my dad was a professional at making people laugh. When he met someone, if he made you feel like that you've known him for years, right? He could joke with him in a way where they would remember him for decades. And I can prove that because when he died 8 years ago, there were 200 to 300 people wrapping around the funeral home. It looked like we were giving out iPhones at a crematorium, right? And he would have loved that joke, so it's okay to laugh. I'm pretty sure he made one similar about Nokias, so. And just a few months ago when I went home, my mom, she said, I got a call the other day. And I said, really? She said, yeah. It was a lady asking for your dad to come fix her washer because it broke. And he fixed it the first time and he did such a good job that she wanted him to come back. So 8 years, and it was good because it lasted for 8 years, right? So, no, now you're like, that's pretty funny, but mostly sad. But you said politics and I demand discourse. Fake news. All right, cool. I have to do the voice when I do it. So we don't know what fake news is. Fake news is basically things that aren't true but are supposed to be, are true but are not. Basically, it can mean anything. But we've seen that everyone kind of knows what fake news is, right? So what gives rise to the fake news, a large majority, is entertainment. We all want to be entertained, right? All of these companies, in some fashion, want to entertain you. We all want our news to be entertaining. And this problem of fake news has started to arise when entertainment mixed with journalism, where we could start to say facts or statistics about how eating 4 chocolate bars a day makes you look like this, right? Things that you can believe it, but you don't want to. It's weird science. And these people are who I'm going to talk about, except for Larry. I don't like Larry that much. We're going to replace him with Jon Stewart just for fun, even though he's not on TV anymore. So these people are who I see as the ones that fight against fake news. Late night comedians. I have lots of spare time. These hosts, particularly John Oliver up there, have made it their job to research, do real journalistic work, and then present it to us in a comedic and entertaining fashion, right? A lot of you know these people because they go very viral very quickly. Anytime John Oliver uploads something, I watch it immediately. So these people are doing real journalistic work, and then giving it to us in an entertaining fashion. They are not the first ones that have done this. The people with the dangly hats were doing it years ago, centuries. Court jesters are my favorite example of this. Court jesters were granted something called the freedom from all constraint. They were called the fools, but they were very smart. Their entire purpose was to make fun of the king, right? They were meant to critique the inner workings of their society, and they could not be punished for it. If a court jester was executed, which you think would happen fairly often, it rarely happened. In fact, court jesters and their kings developed a very special relationship where they were even granted certain privileged burial rights reserved for kings and those of the royal family. So court jesters were able to see outside of their social status and then comment on what they saw. There's a couple great examples of how this has changed history. Funny people have done something, I promise. So, one court jester in particular learned of a plot that was staged to kill the king. But he couldn't come out at dinner and be like, hey man, guess what? It's about over for you. You can't do that. So what he did, he devised a poem on the spot, because everybody spoke in riddles back then. It's just how it happened. He devised a poem, knocked on the door of the king, and said the poem out loud. The king interpreted it, because he had such a close relationship with this court jester, learned of the plot, and changed history, right? Dangly bell hat changed history, okay? One of the most famous examples of court jesters having some importance is in Hamlet. Hamlet says, alas, poor York, I knew him Horatio, a fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy. He was saying this to a skull, by the way, like a skull, right? Yorick was his court jester from his youth, the one that entertained him, that kept him entertained throughout his youth. They developed a very close relationship. So he's actually showing real sadness and sympathy at seeing his dead entertainer's skull. I don't have a skull, but if I did, I'd feel very sad, right? So, this is my favorite example of how comedians have become warriors against fake news, right? I got Jon Stewart back. This was on a show called Crossfire on CNN, where they would have somebody from the red side and somebody from the blue side, and they just scream at each other and go to commercial, basically, right? They invited Jon Stewart on, then host of The Daily Show, where Tucker Carlson proceeded to interrogate him on why he did not ask more hard-hitting questions of then presidential candidate John Kerry. Some of the questions Tucker specifically said, you had this great opportunity to ask questions of a presidential candidate, and instead you asked him how he felt. Why would you do that, right? That is a question you ask a rival journalist outlet, right? That is something that Fox would ask MSNBC, CNN would ask Fox. That's where that should take place. Instead, he was asking the host of a comedy show, in which Jon Stewart replied, dude, the show that leads into me is puppets making crank phone calls. Basically what he's saying there is, why are you asking me to do your job, right? Even though he was, and he was doing great at it. Why was Tucker Carlson, a supposed journalist on this media outlet, asking a comedy host to do his job for him? He even says the news organizations are looking to Comedy Central for their cues on integrity, right? Going back to the picture of all the hosts we saw before, these people are still doing journalist jobs or media outlets jobs for them. A favorite line, if you want to compare your show with a comedy show, you are more than welcome, right? So you think, if he thinks he's just a comedy show, why should we believe him as more than just a comedy show? Well, it's partially because comedians have to build up credibility, right? With media outlets, we just kind of inherently believe what we lean towards, or what our friends lean towards, or our family lean towards, right? Comedians actually do a lot of research into the credibility of what they're talking about. That man is Adam Chitikoff, who's been the producer of The Daily Show for 20 years, and who I will replace when this goes live. So, he says, without credibility, the joke means nothing. The show Adam Ruins Everything, they cite their sources at the top of the screen every time they make a claim. John Oliver does the same. A poll from the Public Policy Polling shows that among registered voters, they trust Jimmy Kimmel more than Republican senators on health care. I don't even like Jimmy Kimmel that much. He's my least favorite of the two Jimmys. But people still believe him. Another study from the Pew Research Group shows that 62% of adults had heard about the Colbert Report, and 10% got their news from him. Now again, Stephen Colbert was playing a character where he basically made fun of Bill O'Reilly, right? But again, we had credibility with them. We trusted them because they were acting in our own interest. When Jon Stewart went on that show Crossfire, he openly said to both of their faces, "Will you please stop hurting America?" Because that's what you're doing. So this speech is to tell you that you should listen to comedians, maybe not me, but like the real ones on TV. They are acting in our best interest. They do their research and they're acting for us. And I can prove that kind of all this works together because I made you laugh and then you listened to what I said and now you believe me. Thank you.
See, aren't you glad there are comedians like us around? That we haven't been eaten by a cannibal? So we would taste pretty funny. No? Thank you. Okay. So, if you can't tell, I've been looking up puns back there in between sets, and I would have told you this chemistry joke, but it wouldn't have gotten a reaction. Thank you. Thank you. Who likes to read? Does anyone here like to read just for fun? Because I enjoy reading, and right now I'm totally stuck in this anti-gravity book. I just can't put it down. Thank you. So then, on to some more heavy topics. Up next, we've got Diana with gentrification and university development in Appalachia. So it's something that we all really need to pay attention to as individuals of the Appalachian community. That wasn't a joke, by the way. That was serious. Please welcome Diana.
Unfortunately, my topic is not that funny, but you know, we'll make the best of it. So, I'm here to talk about gentrification and why it's important as students of Appalachian State University and the community to kind of think about this. So let's start off with the basics. What is gentrification? Gentrification is the process of repairing and rebuilding homes and businesses in deteriorating areas, usually urban neighborhoods, accompanied by the influx of middle class or affluent people that often results in the displacement of the earlier and usually poorer residents. So let's unpack that. What does that mean? What does that mean to be a poorer resident? And what does that mean for university development? So growth is one of the biggest issues of gentrification in Appalachia. So Appalachian State University began as Watauga Academy in 1899, and it had 53 students. And the academy was initiated to help educate rural Appalachia in western North Carolina. So Appalachia has historically been a very poor community. It hasn't had access to the same resources of infrastructure, of development. It's largely always been a very neglected region. So when the university was founded, it was founded as a teacher's college to educate the people in Appalachia who couldn't necessarily head down to Charlotte or Durham or Raleigh to get an education. So it later became Appalachian State Teachers College and it had 13,000 students. Later in 1967, it became Appalachian State University with about 9,000 students, and now we currently see enrollment as of August 2018 of 19,000 students. So that's a lot of growth, from 53 kids to almost 20,000, all packed into this tiny little town where you can't get anywhere at 5 o'clock unless you like move 20 miles per hour. You know, it's not a lot of fun. So let's talk about why all this growth has been such an issue. So when you talk about community, what does that do to the community in the area? It saturates the job market, it displaces long-term residents. So we as students, we are a transient population. For the most part, we'll be here anywhere from 45 years. And then, you know, we're supposed to move off the mountain, but for the most part, we don't. It's a nice area. People like to live here. But that also causes an issue because you have more people staying in Boone than you have going, and that also takes up the resources. There's simply not enough resources in Boone for a population that averages anywhere from 23K to 35K a year, depending on how many freshmen the university decides to admit. So this also displaces long-term residents. So people that have been in Boone for longer than probably I am alive, that I have been alive, could probably tell you of the drastic changes that have happened over time. With the increase of students, it has also increased the need for housing, and now also has displaced a lot of people. It has made housing unaffordable, and it has caused a strain on the amounts of job opportunities there are in Boone. So as students, we could also empathize with how awful rent is. Like, I pay $550. Lucky for me, I found someplace that was all inclusive. But for the most part, all these large rental corporations like to prey upon the fact that, a lot of us can afford to live in a place where you pay upwards to $700 for a single bedroom. And, somebody who is living on a single income with kids and with families simply can't afford that. Like, I'm paying $550 for one bedroom. People are out here can't even pay for that for one house for their entire family. Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, students are transient populations. It's no longer feasible to live in Boone. And even we as students now kind of see the impacts of why rent has become so high. It's forcing us to go further out into Deep Cap, Fosco, Seven Devils, Todd. Why? Because rent is cheaper. So again, going back to earlier generations, people will tell you up and down about how they used to walk both ways up in the snow just to get to class. You can't do that anymore because students aren't living close enough to campus for that to be something else. It's like, hey man, we could withstand the cold just like y'all, but y'all didn't have to live 20 miles away. So that's kind of one of the issues. So with student housing in Boone, as you have probably seen in the last, this is something that even I have seen in the last 4 years, all new housing developments have become student housing developments, exclusively for students and young professionals, often here at the universities, in which rent is upwards to $700 for a single bedroom. Like, excuse me, that is my budget for like 2 months. So people have definitely had their experiences at the cottages, East Village, Mountaineer, the awful eyesore that is the Standard, and Meadowview. And then, I'm sorry if you're from Florida, but the wealthy Floridians that are buying up homes, what are you doing? These homes are being bought up, and they're often unlived in for most of the year. So when you have more houses that are unoccupied in the year, then you have people who need a place to sleep and eat and rest, then you have an issue. And also, they can't drive, so I'm mad about that too. And we can also see that on campus with the on-campus housing crisis. Recently, Appalachian State University decided to develop and, essentially remodel West Campus, which, those dorms were pretty old and they needed to go, but also get limited parking for students, which parking is always a lottery, no matter what day it is. And it has also kind of limited the ability for students to make the decision to live on campus rather than move off campus. It's forcing more students to live off campus and therefore continue saturating the housing market here in Boone. So even most of us see at least 5 posts a day on App State's classifieds, hey, I need a place to live. And within this budget, it's like, oops, everything within this budget was already taken in January. Good luck. But even us as students, we can see how these problems are starting to affect us. And And this is just as students. We have often the privilege of being able to have external sources of income. So parents, my brother helps me out a lot. I hope he's watching. Thanks, bud. He helps me out a lot, you know. So on like months where I don't work as much, he helps me out and I can pay my rent. Other people don't have the same privilege. Other people have to work every single day and they still can afford a 2-bedroom apartment by themselves. And for a lot of these people, they often have small kids. So what happens when a community that's already been here for a while is being replaced by a community who, one, is transient, and two, is more well off? It's gentrification. And that's what we're doing as students. We're essentially pushing out these older communities that have been here for a while because, you know, we can afford it. We can afford to take out loans. Maybe we can't, but we think we can. The debt bubble's gonna crash and it's not gonna matter anyways. But in the meantime, like, we can take out loans, we can take out more money, we can ask our families. A few of us are fortunate enough that, like, we don't have to worry about that. But because we have those external sources of income, rental companies are going to continue rising the cost of rent every single year and effectively pushing more people out. So that ties into saturating the job market. So essentially, you know, if you've been here for a while, you know the only places to work is a university, Walmart, healthcare, or be a server, hospitality and tourism. And you know, at one point in time, Watauga and Boone had other industries, and those no longer exist anymore. A lot of the textile industries that were here were shipped offshore, and therefore you really don't have a lot of opportunities for jobs. You don't have a lot of opportunities for job advancements. And what this does is that, hey, these employers can pay us pennies. And it's fine. Want to know why? Because we're not going to be there that long. We might be there for like 1 year, 2 years, and then we keep moving. And that essentially saturates and devalues the job market because they can do that. They're always going to have somebody to replace us. And that creates limited opportunities for people to have places where they can grow and where they have job security and where they can have essentially a job that can feed their family, feed themselves. So, in talking about this, why it matters, and why it's so important for us to think about this when we think about empathy. And one of the jokes that I made earlier, well, I haven't made it yet, but I made it earlier in my head, is, you know, this town was essentially built for college students. Like, everything in this town was marketed towards us. You know, businesses thrive when our parents come to spend their money for us. And that also has the effect that everything is higher in Boone. Yes, we do see a little bit more better wages, but, you know, it's still not reflective. Usually in the summer months, when the Floridians come up and the students go away, you know, it cycles. So, let's talk about my favorite thing, breweries. Who loves a good beer? I love a good beer. You don't wear this much plaid if you don't love a good beer. And breweries are expensive. They're expensive to manufacture. When you're paying anywhere from $4 to $8 for, you know, 12 ounces of beer, it doesn't matter how delicious it is, you're still paying a lot. That's the price of an entire meal in just one drink, which later on it won't matter because you're probably going to spend $30 that night anyways. But it's being conscious of the fact that there are 11 breweries in Watauga County and only 5 Section 8 housing. So Section 8 housing is designated low-income housing. So with 5 apartment complexes that are designated Section 8 housing, that's 198 units. That's not a lot. That is crumbs. Just even thinking about 5 Section 8 housing and comparing to all the student housing that exists. So why would it be more beneficial for companies to just build more student housing when it's more profitable? So that's the types of things that we have to think about when we continue living in Boone. It's like, yeah, it's like the Blue Ridge Mountains are beautiful. That's one of the reasons I came to Boone. But also I have to think about my personal impact when I go out to A&B, when I go out to all these breweries, when I go out to all these bars, when I take up space at like my place of employment, and think about that somebody else could have been there, could have been me, could have been making the money I'm making. And these are probably people that need to feed their families. I don't need to feed families. I just need to like feed myself. And occasionally the cats, but you know. So that also ties in to the issue of transportation, which is another thing we can rally around complaining, the Apple Cart. It's not the best mode of transportation, but it is a free service that is offered to everybody in Boone. And the way that we have to think about how we impact transportation is that there are more routes that are consistently going to student housing complexes than they are to hospitality house or other places in the community. And we have to think about that. So next time Apple Cart sends you a survey, take it. Tell them, be like, hey, we need to expand the routes to better serve more people. Why? Because when we're gone on breaks, usually the Apple Carts run on limited routes, and it's not fair to other people who rely daily on this transportation to get by. So, now that I kind of made you a little bit sad, made you a little bit guilty, hopefully. It's one of those things where we really have to think about the amount of space that we take up in a community. And at the end of the day, when everybody leaves and we all graduate, you know, we're going to be like, yay, we made it. But also we have to think about the impact that we left while we were here. And that's one of the things that every single one of you guys can be more conscious about. Every time you go out, every time you're signing a new lease, every time that you see somebody who you probably refer to as a local, we have to think about the impact that our lives and our space takes up at their expense. Because that's essentially what it is. We're living our best lives at their expense, and we should definitely try to reform the way that we think about that. So, in conclusion, like a good paper, App State was created to uplift the region and provide opportunities to people, and in my opinion, it has done the complete opposite at this point. It's more interested in investing in its image and its propriety and its legacy than it is to giving back to the community that it was supposed to uplift from poverty. Thank you.
I know, I'm back, I'm sorry. You know, before Diana's speech, I was really nervous and kind of afraid about tackling such a serious topic like gentrification. Kind of like my fear of speed bumps, but thanks to Diana, I'm slowly getting over it. Thank you. So is anybody in here kind of chilly, like kind of cold? Because if you move and sit in the corners, they're always 90 degrees. Hang on. God, I'm hilarious.
What about Cascades? Its corners are 90 degrees.
There we go. Go to Cascades. Not really. Please stay here. We will have a reception afterwards as well. Like I said, cheesecake bites. Also, so what do you call a man with no nose and no body? Nobody knows. It's okay. Nobody knows. So we all live in Boone, like Diana was talking about, so I'm sure that we've driven past some like country roads where there's a lot of cows meandering around. And you know, the thing about cows in Boone is they're really special. Like, they're really great cows. In fact, they are outstanding in their field right now. Awesome. Thank goodness. So then it's a no-brainer that last but not least is our favorite speaker, Elena, here to talk to you about neuroplasticity. Change your brain, change your life.
Okay, neuroplasticity, change your brain, change your life. It sounds a little clickbaity and almost too good to be true, but I promise you, if you just learn about this concept and the implications that it has, not only in forming our experiences, but in how we can change our experiences, it truly is life-altering. So first, a little bit about me. I am a fourth-year undergrad student here at Appalachian State. I'm a psychology major. I like brains, as you can see there with me holding one. And that's why I'm talking to you about this. I love brains. But it goes beyond just an academic interest for me. I have a very personal vested interest in how neuroplasticity, how our brains change themselves in response to the environment, how that has really impacted my life personally. So I have a chronic neurological condition that has caused me to have a wide variety of symptoms, muscle tremors, seizures, nice little EEG cap there, needing modalities to help me with walking, things like that, all sorts of really, really complex neurological issues that made it so difficult for me to function. I actually had a TIA in May of 2017, which is a fancy way of saying a partial stroke, which caused a lot of challenges and difficulty in recovering from at 21 years old. So I obviously have recovered since from then. I can walk and do all sorts of things, move both limbs, so that's awesome. But it wasn't just, fate that made me get where I am today. It really was understanding how this principle of neuroplasticity works. So what even is neuroplasticity? Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to reorganize itself in response to its environment. So both the external, what we're seeing, what we're hearing, what's going on in the world around us, and then also what's going on inside. So what we're thinking, what we're feeling, what our cells are doing, all these different things are going on simultaneously, and our brains have evolved to do this so that we can continue to adapt to the world around us and to the world inside of us. And so it's really, really cool how we as humans have developed this. We actually didn't understand the role that this played in trauma, like healing from things, until the 1960s with veterans. So it's pretty interesting. It's usually seen in stroke recovery is where you see a lot of mainstream neuroplasticity programs, but there's a lot more information out there now, and it's growing as a field in neuroscience. So we used to think that rewiring only occurred in childhood, or that we just, were programmed and then we were just ready to go little robots. But that's not the way it works at all. Actually, as people, across our lifespan, we're constantly taking in stimulus and accommodating those experiences in order to change our lives. So, so that early childhood form that I was talking about before is called functional, and so that's where we think about those early experiences that you have. Maybe you are learning how to eat food, and so you have a spoon and you dunk it in the food and you do not have that fine motor control, so you're just kind of doing this and like maybe you mash it all over your face, and it's cute because you're a baby, it's fine. But by the time you're an adult, you've obviously progressed beyond that point, hopefully, because as you're doing that same action over and over again, picking up the spoon and bringing it to your mouth, well, your brain has wired a new pathway to do that, to make it faster, to streamline the process. And so you pick up the spoon and you bring it to your mouth, and as you keep practicing that and you keep doing that, it becomes an automatic process. So many of the things that we do in our lives every single day are automatic processes that used to require a lot of really concentrated effort. So that's the functional, and that sort of is how things get rolling within neuroplasticity, how we begin to learn and to develop and to grow. But that's not the only form of neuroplasticity that I'm going to talk to you about. Structural is how the strength of connections between neurons, which are the little cells that are sending these signals along the synapses, which are the little receptor spots, that's how they are changing in response to our environment. And so that's what's really what I'm talking about here as far as how things are changing constantly. So Hebb's principle is basically something that was developed to help us understand this principle of neuroplasticity. So how when things fire together, they wire together. So I'm looking at the sky, at the mountains right now. It's absolutely gorgeous. And I see that, and it is blue, and there are clouds in it, and I know that that's sky. Now there's a few different layers of things going on here. I've got the visual stimulus that I'm seeing, blue. I recognize the color that it is. I have a word that's a reference for what it is. And so all across those different domains, I have one complete thought. This is the sky and it's blue. That was something that was wired together. And so even if the sky is not blue one day, like it often is here in Boone, it's gray and it's rainy, and I'm like, ugh. I mean, that's still the sky. I can't really see it, but I know that's the sky. And maybe I see somebody wearing a Tar Heel sweatshirt, and I say, okay, that's like sky blue. So we've got these connections here. We understand how these neurons, these synapses, are wiring together and creating these pathways that help us to operate a little bit quicker, sort of like a computer operating system. So here's a good example of how we do that. Diana was just talking about all of the little back roads and how crazy it is to try to drive down the main highways here in Boone. I don't know about you, but there are a lot of back roads here that we try to navigate to avoid 421 and 321 because it's a lot more simple. But the first time I drove down some back roads in Boone, I was a little nervous because I was unfamiliar with the area, and I was just kind of going along, and everything kind of looked the same. I'm seeing mountains, I'm seeing little tiny houses, I'm seeing, I don't know if it's a gas station or a hut or what's going on over there, but I don't know. But the first few times I would go down, it would be a little confusing, a little, disconcerting. There'd be a little internal conflict there, but I would go and I would learn the route. And now I'm going home and I'm going down these back roads, and it's an automatic process. I don't even think about it. Sometimes I get home and I'm like, how did I even get there, It becomes something that's so subconscious because you are training those little pathways in your brain. Well, our brains like to work like that all across all different domains. And so all these different actions that we're participating in, all these different thoughts that we're having, things that we're seeing, all of these different realms of our lives, we are going down back roads to try to make things simple and to try to help us to understand things better. All of this occurs within the context of the limbic system. I'm going to get a little neuroscience-y here, but hold tight. I promise I'll try to make it sound like English. So the amygdala is really the main place where all of this is happening. All of this happens really inside the limbic system. But the amygdala is where we get our emotions and our memory. The hippocampus and the hypothalamus help us with that too, with providing us the context and the memory for it. But really we're looking at the amygdala here for where we have emotion involved. And so it's really interesting to me when I first learned about this, about how this learning process occurred within the context of emotion and context and memory. It was kind of confusing to me. I was like, really? But then I thought about it. And I don't know about you, but I can remember one of the happiest days of my life. It's gold in my brain and so exciting and happy. And then there are times that are really, really negative. I bet if I asked you, like, what was the worst day of your week? You could remember in very full detail, even if it happened, a while back, you would be able to give me very clear details about what happened, how negative it was, and how it made you feel, and probably some pretty specific details. However, if I asked you about what you had for breakfast last Tuesday, you might wait for a second and be like, I don't actually remember that. Why is that? Well, it's because we have memory associated with emotion. And so if we have a really strong emotion, positive or negative, then we're more likely to remember something because of the system that it's happening within. Whereas if it's just something like, okay, I'm eating a meal or I'm in a class and I'm not even paying attention, I have no connection to this material, it's kind of hard to remember. It's kind of like I walk out of there and it's gone, So we learn and we do all these things within the context of the limbic system. And so our emotion and our memory and the context of how these things are happening are really, really important to how we are rewiring and how we're responding to our environment and to ourselves. So to illustrate a great example of this, I have a friend for you. This is the Floobergoobler. You've probably never heard of him. He's a great guy. He's purple, obviously. And fun fact about Floobergoobler, he likes to do cartwheels. Loves it. So this means nothing to you. You're like, okay, there's a purple thing on the screen, and apparently it likes to do cartwheels. Why does this matter to me? Well, the Floobergoobler is going to teach us a little bit about how we create neural pathways. So together, I'm going to have all of you say with me, and this is going to feel weird, but we're going to do it anyways. The Floober-Goobler is purple, and he likes to do cartwheels. The Floober-Goobler is purple, and he likes to do cartwheels. The Floober-Goobler is purple, and he likes to do cartwheels. The Floober-Goobler is what? And he likes to do cartwheels. Very nice. Okay, so we just created a new neural pathway. Congratulations. Floober-Goobler is never getting out of your head. Now, actually, he could escape your head if you didn't reinforce it. And so I would like to challenge you to any time that you see something purple, or maybe you see someone do a cartwheel, you just tell yourself, the Floober-Goobler is purple, and he likes to do cartwheels. Cool. Okay, we've got a new pathway. It's awesome. This is completely meaningless to your life. It's a Floober-Goobler, like it's a nonsensical creature, and you're probably never going to see him again unless you go back through and watch my video. So that's creating a new pathway, and that's cool, and that was pretty simple to do. You know, we had some repetition, we had to reinforce it, and we're going to reinforce it in the future whenever we see something purple, or we see someone do a cartwheel, or if we just think about this talk. What's a little more tricky, more challenging, is editing a pathway that we already have. Because we have a lot of these road systems in our heads already. We have these automatic pathways that we like to take. But if we deviate from that, if we try to change it, it's a little difficult. We have some resistance. So for an example, I'd like to offer you this. Oh, no, we're not going to do that. Okay. Blondes have more. No, we're not going to say fun. I know how tempted you are to say it because that's something we've all been conditioned to hear. It's something we've all heard at some point in our lives. But what if I told you blondes don't have more fun? What if it was blondes have more pet cats? Or blondes have more PhDs? Or blondes have more trouble filing their taxes? I don't know. You have to come up with something different that is not fun in your head of what blondes have more of. And it feels weird and kind of kooky for me to even say that because it's going against something that we all have a common narrative about. But if I asked you to practice this every day, you know, a few times a day, maybe every time you saw a blonde person, maybe just every time you looked in the mirror, you have a regimented schedule, you're going to say this 5 times, whatever, you know, blondes have more trouble filing their taxes, or blondes have more parakeets, or whatever it was that I said. Are going to reinforce that. And it's going to be tricky, but eventually somebody, you know, brings up that phrase to you. Instead of thinking blondes have more fun, you're going to think blondes have more parakeets or trouble filing their taxes or whatever it is that we decided on. So that's how we modify a pathway. And as you noticed, that was a little more tricky just because it's different and it causes us a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of distress to do it, but we can still do that. So this is yet another example that doesn't that much apply to our lives unless we are really taking that blondes have more fun stereotype to heart. So how do we apply this in a grander scheme? How did I apply this to my life when I was recovering from this complex illness? Well, there are positives and negatives to neuroplasticity. We can utilize all this information that we have, and we can utilize how we can engage our emotions and our memory and our context and decide on what we're going to tell ourselves and how we're going to try to edit our internal environment or our external environment. And that can be a really positive thing. You know, the Floober-Goobler was kind of happy. He was cute, he was friendly, and you know, the blondes have more whatever is a little more neutral. You know, we don't have that much of an association with our new term that we have for that. But there can be negatives in neuroplasticity. We're doing this all the time, remember? So if the way that we're thinking, feeling, and behaving really impacts our mental state and even beyond that, our physical state and the lives that we lead, then what are we thinking, doing, feeling, and acting on that is modifying the way that our lives are progressing? You know, all the time our brains are taking in stimulus and we are choosing what to do with it. And so that can, you know, put a little bit of a burden on us to realize what we're doing, but then also can challenge us to rise above and to choose how we're going to live our lives. So for me, it required me to stop, and when I was having all of these different health issues, you know, as I was recovering, I had to stop and think about, you know, what am I saying to myself? What are these subconscious thoughts that I'm thinking? Because sometimes I look at myself in the mirror, and I'm having a bad day and I'm not feeling well, and I just say, I don't like it. I don't like what I'm seeing, I don't like what I'm feeling, and I'm just down on myself. And that's a common experience, I think, even if you haven't had a chronic illness or a flubbergoobler or whatever it is. We've all had difficult times in our lives, and we all have things that we want to overcome or maybe change about our lives. So I'm having this negative thought process. I'm thinking, I don't like myself, I don't like what I'm seeing, I don't like how I'm feeling, I don't like my life. And it snowballs because I've got this strong negative emotion going on. I have, a visual stimulus maybe. I have all these different elements going on. And so it snowballs. And then maybe the next time I'm not feeling well or I'm having a bad day or something, those same thoughts, because remember the Hebs principle, what fires together wires together, that's all coming back together as one in a perfect catastrophe symphony. And so we can, go down a rabbit hole really fast, and I know a lot of people do that regularly, myself included. Like right before I started this, I was like, I can't do this. But I had to stop myself, and I went into the bathroom, and I looked at myself in the mirror, and I said, I am calm and capable in any situation. I am calm and capable in any situation. And I just stood in front of that mirror and I said that until I was able to have a little less of a frantic heart rate and maybe think I wasn't gonna pass out, and then I came back in here. So obviously this is something that we can utilize for the positive or for the negative. We have these negative patterns that we can catch ourselves falling into, but then also these really beautiful positive ones that we can create. Maybe I wanna start a new habit. Maybe I want to wake up early every day. And maybe I want to, exercise more or do all these things. Like, this is just like another habit that you can reinforce. The beliefs that you want to have about your life, about like how you are existing in the world, you can change that. I know it seems like a lot, but it's really not. And neuroscience supports that. It's actually something that you can do in just feasible little steps. It doesn't have to be this huge thing of like, I'm gonna overhaul my life, I'm gonna change the world. Like, yes, you are, but you can do that in tiny little steps of just looking at yourself on those days where it's hard and saying, I believe in me, and I can do this, and I have everything within me right now to do everything that I'm meant to do. So we have those positives and negatives, and we have all these different elements going on. We understand the neuroscience of how this works. And so we have to think about, okay, am I going to modify the pathways that I currently have? What pathways do I have that are maybe negative or not serving me in the way that they should? Maybe I used to have a pathway where I limped when I walked because I had all this musculoskeletal damage and nerve damage and all of these things that were really difficult. And when nerves die, they don't come back. They're gone. So all of the damage that I've sustained in my brain and my nervous system is there to last. But I'm still here and I'm still able to function and to thrive because my brain and my body are so strong and capable that they were able to rewire and to utilize different parts of my body and my brain to do the same things I was doing before. There's no going back, but we can go forward and we can choose how we want to live. So we have to remember to engage our emotions when we're doing this process. We have to have a really strong positive or a strong negative, make it a big deal. When you are looking at yourself and you're saying, I'm calm and I'm capable, or I'm strong and resilient, or whatever the mantra you need to say, like, put a big fat smile on your face, even if it feels stupid. Like, we have like positive positioning and stuff, the power stance, all these fun things. Like, these are real and they do help and they can serve you in your journey and in your life. And doing this regularly and disciplined, like taking it day by day, moment by moment, you're exposed to something that's a trigger for like a painful experience, something that is difficult for you, whatever. You just stop wherever you are in the moment and repeat those phrases, those things that are meaningful to you. Do things that challenge you, write with your left hand if you're right-handed, or like hop on one foot, or do things in ways that kind of make things a little bit difficult for you, but challenge you. Think outside the box and do something creative and do all these things to reinforce these new pathways that you want to create and modify the pathways that you currently have. Because as you change your brain, you truly will change your life. Thank you.
All right, no more puns, just a couple of thank yous before we get out to the reception. I'd like to give a thank you to App TV and to our sound person for really helping us out with the mics back there and taking the live stream for us. Totally. Also, again, thanks to App Speaks. I'd like to specifically thank our president, Carson. She really busts her butt to get this together for us. Thank you, Dr. Richard, who's standing right here in the back. We could all clap for him. Without a faculty advisor, we literally wouldn't exist, so he's really great for us. Also, thanks to the App State Communications Department for letting us have a club and letting us exist and put on this great event for our students. Thank you to our speakers. Give them another huge round of applause. Totally. Takes a lot of guts to get up here, let me tell you. And then pretty much just go out there and have a good time. If you want to scan that QR code on the back of your programs and apply for Panorama next year, that'd be great. If not, have a great night.